The most exciting, the most important part of our Florida project, in fact, the heart of everything we'll be doing in Disney World, will be our experimental prototype city of tomorrow.
Before Epcot became a theme park, it was arguably Walt Disney's most outlandish idea of his career. Originally, Epcot was to be a utopian city. Walt Disney spent the last few months of his life deeply engrossed in this urban planning project. This Epcot was to be something more akin to the Progress City model we now pass on Tomorrowland's People Mover. But once Walt Disney passed away, the Epcot idea was no longer prioritised, as new issues faced the company, which found itself without their leader for the first time ever. We may, these days, mourn the loss of the World Fair-like Epcot brought to life in the 1980s. But if we're looking at what would have been Walt Disney's Epcot, it's more than fair to say that his dreams never became a reality. Largely inspired by architect Victor Gruen, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow was Walt Disney's innovative urban idea, which he had hoped would provide an antidote to the decay of American cities. In 1966, Walt Disney released the Epcot film, in which he stated his plans for the futuristic city. He wanted to use the knowledge he had gained through planning and constructing Disneyland, the California Institute of the Arts, and Burbank Studios to reimagine the American city. It was his vision for what he believed would be his legacy. Bigger than just a theme park, Walt was planning to solve what he saw as one of the biggest issues facing American society: the crime-ridden city.
I don't believe there's a challenge anywhere in the world that's more important to people everywhere than finding solutions to the problems of our cities.
Walt's idea for Epcot was deemed impractical, and I'd say rather fairly so. But when the Imagineers took Walt's idea and utilised it as the inspiration for the second theme park at Walt Disney World, all of Walt's work was not lost. Going from such an ambitious concept to a theme park, it's hard to imagine how much of Walt's original plan was maintained. Ultimately, I think it's pretty fair to argue that Walt's Epcot and the one we got are two wholly different things. But there is a reason the two projects share a name. Essences of Walt's original plan can certainly be found within the theme park. Walt Disney's concept for Epcot was ahead of its time, displaying many of the later established principles of new urbanism, these being walkability, connectivity, smart transportation, sustainability, and quality of life. His forward-thinking ideas were largely informed by the many architectural books he was reading in the last year of his life. Still sitting on the bookshelf in his now preserved office, the influences of these urban planners and thinkers helped develop the concept for Walt's futuristic city. Much of what Walt took from these city planning concepts could of course not translate to the Epcot theme park, but that does not mean that there is nothing of these ideas to be found within the theme park at all. One of Walt Disney's biggest inspirations for Epcot was a book called The Heart of Our Cities by the already mentioned Victor Gruen. Victor Gruen was an architect concerned about the effects of urban sprawl. He feared that as people spread further outside the city, the businesses that thrived on city life would find themselves struggling to attract these geographically distant populations. In order to try to combat this, he theorized the cellular metropolis, a suburb divided into smaller community cells, encircling an indoor shopping mall nucleus. Essentially, he wanted to place the offerings of the city under one more local roof. Walt utilised a similar design for his Epcot, planning to circle houses and apartments around a climate-controlled centre that would host a convention centre, a 30-storied cosmopolitan hotel, and a weather-protected zone of themed shops. Basically, Walt, like Gruen, wanted to build a shopping mall. To us, this idea might not sound revolutionary, but back in the 60s, it was still pretty new. In fact, Gruen was actually the architect behind the first suburban shopping mall, a radical urban design in the 1950s, which went on to become the norm in the decades that followed. Gruen designed Northfield Mall near Detroit in 1954. This was the first suburban open-air shopping mall. It was as revolutionary to urban design as Disneyland would prove to be a year later. By 1956, he had put a roof over his shopping mall idea and opened the Southdale Center in Edina, Minnesota. Now, Epcot today may not be a shopping mall or a city, but I think it's pretty easy to see the influence of Gruen upon the theme park. If we take a look at the unique structure of what was the Future World pavilions, I think it's pretty easy to spot Gruen's influence. Epcot is home to various pavilions which have fluctuated over the years, but the interior housing of multiple offerings has always been a consistency. From Innoventions to Wonders of Life or the Still Open The Land, there is something mall-like in their structure. On the outside, no building is that different from one another, but once you entered each pavilion, the interior was something completely different from the exterior. The Future World pavilions, in essence, function in the same way as the shopping mall. They bring multiple separate attractions under one roof, which hopes to offer a unified experience. The pavilions may not have wanted us to shop, but they certainly utilised Gruen's concept of a climate-controlled space which welcomes people inside to experience an array of things. So yes, maybe you've heard some people complain that the Land Pavilion feels like a mall food court. And well, I don't think the similarities are all that coincidental. Gruen also wrote of a ped shed, this being the desirable walking distance that a lazy walker on a one-purpose trip without interruption will walk. If the walker can sit, shop, or eat, it distracts them and they can go longer distances. Walt's Epcot would have had a large ped shed because of the highly attractive and completely weather-protected environment of its nucleus. Now, this shopping mall convention hotel hybrid nucleus may not be present within the theme park we have today, but I think the ped shed concept is a pretty theme park friendly one. While you could apply it pretty easily to any theme park, I think this concept particularly links to Epcot's World Showcase. The World Showcase does not incentivize us to walk simply from attraction to attraction, as we typically do within a theme park. Instead, we are invited to explore the distance, breaking up our walk by perusing the varied shops, and especially thanks to Epcot's many food festivals, the dining options on offer. Your average theme park guest may not particularly desire an almost 1.5 mile walk, but when that walk is broken up by all the offerings of each country's pavilion, well, 1.2 miles has never felt so short. Like we often talk of with Epcot, much of Walt's original concept can be found not only within the theme park, but also the entirety of Walt Disney World. Gruen was a strong advocate for separating all mechanical and utilitarian functions away from the public realm. It is from this concept that the utilidors, originally planned for Walt's Epcot but actually built under the Magic Kingdom, came. These allow all functions to be neatly placed out of guest sight. In the heart of our cities, Gruen actually mentions Disneyland and finds the park to be an important urban space and an excellent example of cellular urban organisation. But he was critical of what happened to the area surrounding the theme park. By the 1960s, Walt was also concerned about the area just outside of Disneyland's gates. It was becoming a hodgepodge of motels, restaurants, and other tourist-serving enterprises. Thus, When planning for his resort in Florida, Walt was sure to obtain enough land to control the environment surrounding the theme park. Gruen was also frustrated by the lack of progress in the development of new public transportation technologies. He commented that millions of people go to Disneyland to ride a monorail that is being promoted as the transportation system of the future. But the technology has been around since the 1890s. Solving the mobility problem is where Walt would take major improvements upon Gruen's design. Transportation systems were one of Walt's passions and specialities. For Epcot, he proposed the use of monorails, people movers, and electric vehicles to move people around. The Epcot theme park did receive a monorail, but the people mover developed more into an attraction than a means of transportation. However, if you've ever been to Walt Disney World, I'm sure you'll recognise that the transportation options feel endless and make for such easy access. From buses to boats to skyways and monorails, transportation is a key feature of the resort. Gruen may have written of concepts that were to apply to a city, and Walt may have wanted to apply these to his very own city-like community. And while this never came to fruition, I think it's fair to say that Gruen's influence on Walt didn't completely go to waste, but instead informed aspects of the Epcot theme park and Walt Disney World as a whole. What aspect of Gruen's influence do you think can still be seen the most at Epcot, or more widely, Walt Disney World today? And do you think that with all the recent updates to Epcot, some of this is being lost? Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and check out my links in the description.